The fire was burning at its lowest sustained level of the night, low enough that the shadows in the shelter had become the dominant feature, the light a remnant thing, present but not asserting itself. Nobody had suggested adding more wood. They were all in it now, fully in it, and the low fire felt right for the last 2 stories, the way certain music feels right for certain hours. Sam had his sleeping bag completely around him. Only his face was visible, and his face was the face of someone who had gone through frightened and out the other side into something that didn't have a simple name. Not calm, not acceptance, something more specific than either. He was watching Elias with the attention of someone who has been assembling a picture all night and has finally understood what the picture is of. "This shelter," he said. "30 years ago, you were here." "I was here," Elias said. "As the ranger." "As the ranger," Elias said. "Yes." "The 9th story," he paused. "The 9th story is about you." Elias looked at him for a long moment. Something in his face did the thing it had done at moments across the night, the small movement at the edge of expression, the thing that moved when the conversation had arrived somewhere true. "The 9th story is about a solo climber who reached the summit of Mount Rogers in a February whiteout and found footprints in the snow going up, only going up." Lena said, "And the climber was you." Elias looked at the fire. "The climber," he said, "was the person I was 30 years ago. I'm not sure he and I are the same person. I think that's part of what the 10th story is about." He looked at each of them in the reading way, the full attention way. But the 9th story first. Greta set down her empty cup. She had the quality of someone who had been moving toward this moment all night and was now here and was ready. "Tell it," she said. "I had been in the district for 2 years when it happened. Young by the standards of what this job made you. 28 years old, fit, confident in the way that 2 years of backcountry work made you confident, which was a good confidence built on real experience and not quite sufficient for what the mountains were capable of on their worst days. I had done the summit of Mount Rogers a dozen times. I knew the route. I knew the exposed section above the tree line. I knew how fast the weather moved on the high bald. I knew the shelter system and the bailout options and the specific way the mountain behaved in winter. I knew all of this. I did not know what the mountain was capable of doing to a person when it chose to. It was the 3rd week of February. I had a permit check to do on the summit area. Winter permits were required for overnight camping on the Rogers summit, and there was a group that had filed for 3 nights and was due to come off that day, and I'd had no radio contact from them since their 2nd night. Standard protocol was to go in and check. Standard protocol did not account for the weather that had been building since Tuesday. I went in Wednesday morning from the Elk Garden trailhead. The weather was bad, but not impossible when I started, the kind of February morning in the highlands that was committed to being difficult without being life-threatening. Snow on the ground from the previous days, overcast, temperature in the low 20s, wind coming off the ridge at 15 to 20. I was dressed for it. I had the right gear. I started up the ridge with the easy confidence of 2 years in this district and the knowledge that the conditions, while uncomfortable, were within my range. The conditions changed on the upper ridge. Not gradually, the way conditions in the Virginia highlands change in February, which is to say faster than the rational mind keeps up with, and with a comprehensiveness that can make the world you were in 5 minutes ago feel like a different planet. By the time I reached the exposed section above the tree line, the visibility was under 30 feet, and the wind was doing something to the snow that made the 30 feet of visibility academic. I could see the ground beneath my feet and approximately nothing else. I continued. I had a compass, and I had the route memorized, and I had the confidence, that good confidence, the confidence built on real experience, that I could navigate the upper section in limited visibility. I had done it before, not in conditions this severe, but in conditions that had taught me I could do it. What I found when I reached the summit area stopped me. I want to be precise about what stopped me, the way I want to be precise about everything in this story, because precision is what I have, and precision is what I owe to what happened. The summit of Mount Rogers is a wooded area, a stand of red spruce at the highest point, the open bald giving way to trees at the very top, which is counterintuitive but is what the mountain does. In winter, with the wind and the snow, the summit spruce become a different kind of place than they are in other seasons. The branches loaded, the space between them reduced, the light already poor and made poorer by the canopy and the overcast and the blown snow. A closed-in, white, disorienting space. In that space, in the snow, there were footprints going up. A single set of footprints, a person's footprints in the fresh snow, going up toward the summit trees from the direction of the approach I'd been using, coming from below me, from the direction I'd come from the route I'd followed up the mountain. Behind me. I turned and looked back down the way I'd come. The visibility was under 30 feet, and there was nothing in those 30 feet. No person, no movement, no sign of anyone on the route I'd just descended. I looked at the footprints. They were fresh, not filled with blown snow, not softened by time, made recently, made after the current snowfall had begun, made in the last hour, I estimated, based on their condition. Made, potentially, while I was on the route, behind me, where I had not seen anyone. I turned back toward the summit, and I followed the footprints, not because it was the sensible thing to do. I was a ranger, and there was a missing group, and I had a job to do, and the footprints went in the direction of the job. I followed them because they were there, and because what else do you do with footprints that go up a mountain behind you? They led me into the summit spruce. The spruce stand in February in a whiteout is, I've tried to describe it to people, and the best I've been able to do is this. It is a room, not a forest. The trees are close enough that the canopy is nearly continuous, and the blown snow fills the spaces between the trunks, and the visibility inside the stand is different from the visibility on the open bald, more limited and somehow more complete, the white of the snow and the white of the sky and the dark of the spruce trunks, creating a world of high contrast in which you can see the things that are there very clearly and cannot see anything beyond them. The footprints continued through the stand. I followed them. They led me toward the center of the stand, the highest point, the actual summit, a point that in summer had a sign and in winter was unmarked, identifiable only by the GPS reading and the specific configuration of the largest spruce. They stopped. In the center of the stand, at the point that was the summit, the footprints stopped. Not in a way that suggested the person had turned back. There were no return prints, no place where the prints turned or doubled back. They simply stopped, as if the person who had made them had ceased to exist at that point or had left the ground in a direction that snow doesn't record. I stood at the place where the footprints stopped, and I looked at them for a long time. I looked at the summit spruce around me. I looked at the snow and the sky visible in the gaps in the canopy above. I was alone, completely alone, in the specific way that the summit of a mountain in a whiteout is alone. The world contracted to the space immediately around you, everything beyond it not existing in any practical sense. I was alone, and I was looking at footprints that had no explanation, and I want to be honest about this, I was frightened. The good confidence kind of frightened, that knows the difference between a problem with a solution and a problem of a different order. These were the second kind. I set up my emergency shelter, not this shelter, a bivy I was carrying, the emergency equipment that I always carried and had never needed to deploy in 2 years in this district. I set it up at the summit because the weather was making descent inadvisable, and because I had enough supplies for an overnight, and because the missing group's permitted camp was somewhere in the summit area. And I had a job to do, even if the job had become very strange. I found the group's camp. They were fine, weathered in, sensible, had stayed put when the weather closed in rather than attempting a descent they couldn't safely make. 6 people in 2 tents on the lee side of the summit spruce, perfectly equipped, perfectly calm. I checked them over, confirmed they were okay, told them I'd be nearby overnight, and we'd descend together in the morning when the weather broke. I went back to my bivy. I want to tell you what happened that night carefully, because carefully is the only way I know to tell it. I was in the bivy at the summit of Mount Rogers in a February whiteout, and I was not sleeping. Not because of the cold or the wind or the noise of the storm. I had spent nights in worse conditions, and the bivy was doing its job. I was not sleeping because of what I had found at the summit, and because of the quality of attention the mountain was paying. I felt it the way you feel things you don't have instruments for, the way you feel a change in pressure before you can measure it. The mountain was paying attention to me in the specific way that Buzzard Rock paid attention, the quality of being fully apprehended, seen, categorized. But Buzzard Rock was a point on a ridge. This was the whole mountain. This was 32 square miles of Virginia highland paying attention to one person in a bivy at the summit. It was not threatening. I want to say this clearly because what I'm describing sounds like it should be threatening, and it wasn't. It was thorough. The attention was thorough and patient and very old and entirely focused. At some point in the night, I can't say what time because I had stopped checking, I heard something outside the bivy. Not the wind, not the storm. Something that was in the storm and distinct from it, the way a voice in a crowd is in the crowd and distinct from it. It was not a voice. I want to be clear about that. It was not language, but it had the quality of communication. The directedness of it, the sense of something oriented toward me specifically, toward the bivy, toward whoever was inside it. A communication that wasn't language, the way a look across a room isn't language, but is still a communication. I lay in the bivy and I received it. I don't have complete language for what was communicated. I have approximate language, the way you have approximate language for things that arrived before words and couldn't be processed into words until much later. What I received was something about the mountain. Something about what the mountain was and how long it had been what it was and what it held and what it had always held and what had come to it and what would come to it. Not a history, something more fundamental than history. The structure of the thing, the deep grammar of what this place was, and what it wanted. I'm going to stop at that for a moment. I've been 30 years getting to a place where I can say it simply. What it wanted. Mountains don't want things. I know that. The rational framework I was trained in, the naturalist's framework, the ranger's framework, none of those have room for a mountain wanting something. I've been working around this for 30 years, using other language, saying things like what happens in these mountains, what the mountains do, the quality of the mountain's attention. All of it approximate. All of it avoiding the word that the bivy on the February summit finally put in front of me in language I couldn't refuse. What it wanted was to be known. Not studied, not surveyed, not managed. Known. In the way that a person wants to be known, fully, in their complexity, in the long history of what they are and what they've held, the kind of knowing that requires time and attention and the willingness to receive what is given without immediately translating it into the categories you brought with you. What it wanted was someone who would stay. Not forever, though forever is also a kind of category I'd brought with me that the mountain didn't need me to use, but someone who would stay long enough, who would be here in the same way that the old families had been here, the way the Melungeon families had been here, the way the people before writing had been here. Not passing through, but present, tending the knowing the way August Lowe tended the figures, the way the thing at the Lewis Fork fire tended the fire. I lay in the bivy, in the whiteout on the summit of Mount Rogers, and the mountain communicated this to me in the approximate language of things that happened before words, and I received it, and I said yes. Not out loud, not in any form an outside observer would have recorded. I said yes the way you say yes to something that has been asking since before you arrived and will be asking after you leave, with the whole of what you are, rather than with the part of you that makes sounds. The attention shifted. Not ended, I want to be precise, not ended, but changed quality, from the focused thoroughness of assessment to something else, something that felt, as closely as I can describe it in the language available, like acknowledgement, like a long question had been answered in the way the questioner needed it answered. I slept. The first sleep of the night, and the deepest sleep I'd had in years, and when I woke, the storm had broken, and the summit was clear, and the light was coming in the way February light comes in after a storm, clean and cold and exact, the world fully resolved after the whiteout's dissolution of it. I came down with the group, I filed my patrol report, I went home, and I slept again. In the weeks after, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I cycled through the explanations available to me. Hypothermia, though I'd been well-equipped and well-fed. Hypoxia, though the Rogers summit was not at altitude sufficient to produce hypoxic hallucination. Exhaustion, though I'd been rested when I went up. The particular psychology of isolation in extreme weather. Each explanation was available, and none of them fit the experience the way a key fits a lock. They all required me to deform the experience into a shape it didn't have in order to make the explanation work. I stopped trying to explain it. I have not tried since. What I did instead was stay. I had been 2 years in the district when it happened. I stayed for 30 more. I have been in these mountains in every season and every weather for 32 years, and what the mountain communicated to me on the February summit, the deep grammar of what this place is, I have been learning it, slowly. The way you learn a language by living in it rather than studying it. Not completely, not with the facility of a native speaker, but enough to recognize it when I encounter it. Enough to know what I'm dealing with when I go to Woolly Hollow, or stand on the footbridge above Hurricane Creek, or put my hand on the stone at a Lewis Fork campsite. Enough to tell the stories. The footprints in the summit's snow, going up and stopping at the center of the spruce stand. I have thought about them for 30 years. I have an understanding of them now that I did not have on the day I found them. I believe they were made for me to find. I believe the mountain, working through whatever mechanism the mountain works through, the things it holds and the way they move through it, put those footprints in the snow because the ranger coming up the mountain needed to be brought to the summit in the right state of mind, unsettled enough to receive, open enough to hear. I believe the footprints were an invitation. I believe I accepted it. I have never been entirely certain what I became that night in the bivy in accepting it. I am not what I was before I went up. I know this. The 30 years since have shown me this in enough ways that I stopped questioning it and started simply noting it as a condition of my life in this place. I am the ranger. I have always been the ranger. But I am also something the mountain needed to have here. A knowing presence, a person who stays, someone who carries the stories and tends them and brings them out when the night is long and the fire is burning and the right people are stranded in the right shelter. Someone who knows when the right people are stranded in the right shelter. Someone who was already here when they arrived. The shelter was absolutely quiet. The fire had burned very low during the telling, lower than it had been at any point in the night, the coals giving more light than the flame. And in the low firelight, Elias's face was different than it had been in the higher light of the earlier hours. Not different in any specific feature, different in the quality of presence, more fully there, the way things become more fully themselves in the dark after a long night. Sam was looking at him with the expression of someone who has arrived at the thing they were moving toward all night and is standing in front of it. He said, "You were already here when we arrived." "Yes," Elias said. "You knew we were coming." Elias was quiet for a moment. "I knew someone was coming," he said. "I've known, on the nights when the storm closes in and this shelter becomes the necessary place, that there will be people here. I come because the fire should be burning when they arrive." "How long have you been coming?" Lena said. Her voice was very steady. The journalist in her had fully given way to whatever she was now in this shelter at this hour. 30 years, he said, on the right nights. "How do you know which nights are right?" Priya said. Elias looked at the fire. "The mountain tells me," he said. He said it simply, without performance, the way you say something that has been true for so long that the saying of it requires no particular effort. "The 10th story," Greta said. Her voice was the steadiest of all of them. 30 years in these mountains. She had been moving toward this moment as long as he had, from a different direction. "Yes," Elias said. "The 10th story." He looked at each of them one last time in the reading way, the full inventory, the complete attention that he had given each of them across the night, and now gave all of them together. "But first," he said, "I want to ask you something." The fire breathed, the storm breathed, the mountain breathed around the shelter in the way it had been breathing all night, patient and vast and very present. "The right people," he said, "are the people who will carry the stories after tonight, who will hold them and tend them and bring them out when the time is right." He paused. "I need to know if you're those people." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Lena closed her notebook. She put it in her pack. She looked at him and said, "Yes." One by one, the others. Priya took the headlamp off her forehead and set it down. "Yes." Marcus looked at the fire and then at Elias and said, "Yes." Sam, from inside his sleeping bag, quietly, "Yes." Greta smiled, the small, complete smile of someone arriving at a place they've been heading for a very long time. "Yes," she said, "obviously yes." Elias looked at the 5 of them. The fire was very low now. Outside, the storm had reached the quality of ending. Not gone, not yet, but changed. The darkness at the shelter opening a slightly different shade than it had been an hour ago. The specific shade of a night that is beginning to consider becoming something else. "Then," he said, "here is the 10th story."